Right now, it looks like I'm playing a video game on my TV off of my laptop right there. I mean, you can see me playing games moving around just fine. Ooh, I'm about to die here. Right? Wrong. I am remoting in to my host computer, which is upstairs, using this laptop and an application called Parsec. And it's using the horsepower of my desktop computer, which is upstairs. That's pretty cool. So let's go into detail. What is Parsec? Parsec is a remote desktop application designed for low latency, and that means we can play games on it. And it's not just for gaming. You can do video editing or access local resources or just about anything on your computer using Parsec. With its low latency, it's perfect for almost anything, so we're going to experiment with it to see how good is it in certain situations. But first, Parsec uses a peer-to-peer system, and what that means is that the client computer and the host computer talk to each other directly. It doesn't go out to a server and then come back, and this saves latency. If you're interested in learning more about how this works, you can visit this article from Parsec themselves that explains it in detail, and it is pretty fascinating, especially if you don't know that this technology exists. So to get started, we're going to need the host computer and the client computer. And I actually have both right here. I'll show them to you. Ooh, back hurts. This is the host computer. I'm not sure if you can see me from here. So let me introduce you to the client that we'll be using. The Thin client is actually what I'm using right now to read the script off of. This is a Surface Laptop 2. It's a weaker laptop, but it's still pretty decent. I'm running Linux on here, and the drivers really aren't optimized for the best experience. However, it should still work for the purpose that we want to use it for. Installing it is pretty easy. All you have to do is go to Parsec's website, download the installer, run it, and then from there, once it's installed on your computer, go ahead and sign in. You're going to want to go ahead and do this on both the client and the host computer. An important thing that you should probably do with Parsec is use Ethernet on both the host and the client computer. This will improve the latency between them. But we're going to test out multiple scenarios to see how well they work, with or without an Ethernet cable, and even on hotspot. So the version of Linux that I'm using on this laptop does not support Parsec, so I'm going to have to flash it with Windows, and I'm out of thumb drives, so I'm making a quick trip to Walmart. I now have everything set up properly. I have Windows and Parsec set up on the laptop right here, and Parsec is installed on the host device. There are 4 environments I'm going to test, and the reason I'm going to test these 4 specifically are because I believe that they're going to be the most common situations. All of them will have Ethernet hooked up to the host, but the client will have different variations of internet connections. The first one will be with Ethernet, the second one will be with Wi-Fi on the same network, and the third one will be with Wi-Fi on a different network, and the fourth one will be using mobile data on my phone, which will be roughly the same as using a hotspot off the phone as well. Now, before we jump into these results, you need to understand that if you're into competitive gaming at all, then this just is not for you. Any form of cloud gaming or remote gaming will not be the best for competitive situations. Another important thing to keep in mind is that this is still remote gaming. Nothing is going to be being right here at your computer. With that being said, I was still pretty impressed with the results, so let's get into that. Using Parsec with both the host and the client using Ethernet on the same network was pretty outstanding. At first, there were major issues with stability, but after a minute, that settled down and the results were really great. Only occasionally were there small stutters, but you could really only see that if you were looking for it. Compression was basically non-existent. Input delay was a little noticeable, however, I still think it was acceptable, and considering all of these factors, I think for what is happening on the technology side, this is pretty outstanding and definitely usable if you use Parsec in this way. Ethernet on the host to Wi-Fi on the client was a mixed bag, so I tested it under 2 different scenarios. The first one was in a room where there was okay Wi-Fi coverage, and the second one was in a room where it was basically in the same room with the router. In the room with okay Wi-Fi coverage, the results were playable depending on the game. Stutters were constant, and it would freeze for a second now and then. But regardless of all this, it was still controllable and viewable, so technically playable. However, if this is your situation where you don't have that great Wi-Fi coverage in your house at the moment, then this just isn't it. However, this can be patched, not fixed, with a Wi-Fi extender or a mesh network. Now, in the room with better Wi-Fi coverage, the results more closely resembled the Ethernet to Ethernet comparison. The only issue with this that I had was that the controller delay was slightly noticeable. However, it wasn't enough to annoy me. I think it's also worth noting here is that unlike the Ethernet test, I didn't even notice any stutters, which was very interesting to see. Overall with this solution, if you have good Wi-Fi coverage and you're not a competitive gamer, then this is pretty good. Now we're using Ethernet on the host and Wi-Fi on the client, but on a different network. And this means that even though that both of them have to go across the internet to communicate to one another, they still communicate to each other directly. It's peer-to-peer, like I said earlier. There isn't a central server that they communicate to, and this saves on latency and makes a faster connection. Now, because of this peer-to-peer system, we see very similar results as we do with them being on the same network. And honestly, this is where I thought we would see a dip in everything. Compression, latency, delay, all of it. The only problems that I had with it was that there was the occasional stutter, as before, and the input delay was just acceptable, not good, but that was as before as well. I didn't run a test in a room farther from the access point because with the results of this being so similar to the previous test, those ones are likely to follow in being similar as well. Overall, I thought it was very playable. In this scenario, we're going to be using Parsec on a phone using mobile data. Parsec has a mobile app which enables you to do this. I think it's needless to say that this is the weaker of all the tests. Even though my mobile carrier is pretty good in this area, I had an issue that made it just unplayable. And that was after 30 seconds of just playing fines, it would just fall off and I would lose the established connection. And drop-offs are something common on a mobile network, which is why Parsec is not applicable to this situation. Now, for the few moments that it was working, it did actually work pretty well. I was actually pretty surprised at how well it was working initially. But once a drop-off would happen, it would just freeze and I could not continue without reloading it. And it did this every 30 seconds. So this is just overall unplayable. Now that we've gone over several different scenarios of internet stability with Parsec, I think it's fair to say that Parsec as a low latency remote gaming technique is a viable solution over something like a Steam Deck. This, of course, depends on how you'll be using it, and I hope I've covered something comparable to your situation if you're considering on using Parsec. In conclusion, this is a pretty cool software. Let me know your experience with it in the comments below. I could finally sell my PC now.